It has been 1 year since the Russian 2022 invasion of Ukraine. In this video, I will analyze the air war in the last 30-60 odd days, looking at the initial attack, the use of cruise missiles, kamikaze drones, RPAs and UAVs, and of course the ground-based air defenses. Historians will be going through this conflict in the future, finding out new information and data, so I certainly do not claim that this video is a definitive version of what happened. It is rather what the available sources so far lead us to believe has happened. As always, the sources and other helpful links are in the description below. This video is also sponsored by my awesome patrons and channel members. Channel supporters receive a sign-up bonus of a German World War II recognition manual. Yes, it's definitely declassified, and early access to new videos. We also have a Discord server for supporters with monthly live hangouts, and there is a tier where you can get your name as a sponsor of an Inside the Cockpit episode. I will break down our retrospective into 5 phases. This is not an exact science, there is overlap between these phases, but it compartmentalizes the main trends into time frames for a structured analysis. I focus of course on the air war, and for now do not consider related domains even if they are closely interlinked. Sorry Elon, no Starlink today. Chapter markings for each phase are provided. The first phase was characterized by a lot of confusion on both sides. Ultimately, with the stalling of the ground offensive, the Ukrainian defense around Kyiv managed to consolidate and hold. However, in the air, the Russian Air Force, the VKS, did dominate the conflict at this time. While initially many commentators, including myself in this old video, noted surprise by the lack of Russian VKS success and activity, we now know that they were much more active and much more successful than given credit for at the time. The primary targets of the VKS in this phase were ground-based radar installations, long-range air defenses and air bases. Supporting the main thrust towards Kyiv, Russia targeted Ukrainian early warning radars with electronic warfare and a barrage of cruise missiles. Equally, Russia aimed to capture key points with a number of air assault operations, with Hosmotel near Kyiv being the main target. Russia had success in blinding the radars and striking a significant number of fixed early warning radar positions and fixed air defenses. About 75% of these were actually attacked. On the whole, Russia had established solid intel on nearly all Ukrainian ground-based air defense positions prior to the attack. Air reconnaissance also consistently mapped out Ukrainian positions during this phase, though it appears that Russia was less able to carry out proper bomb damage assessment and relay the information that they were gathering in a timely manner. Due to the absence of air defenses in this early phase, the VKS flew up to 150 sorties a day, penetrating Ukrainian airspace consistently and operating at higher altitudes, and this placed them at an advantage over their Ukrainian adversaries. Russia was less successful in suppressing the Ukrainian Air Force. Most airbases and runways received only minor damage. Its air assault operation against Hosmotel reached the target but was then countered. Russia flew a great number of sorties behind Ukrainian lines, taking significant losses to its rotary wing fleet. Geographically, its air offensive was more successful in the south than in the north next to Kyiv. The Ukrainian Air Force avoided destruction through dispersal and was able to fly combat air patrols, or CAP, over key areas such as the capital. This prevented total control of the air by the VKS. A critical number of Ukrainian air defenses were able to disperse in time to survive. Compared to 75% of fixed air defenses that were engaged, only 10% of the mobile sites were attacked. During this phase, the majority of ground-based air defense by Ukraine was delivered through man-pads. Interception of Russian cruise missiles was below 20%. Ukraine used RPAs, so remotely piloted aircraft like Bayraktar TB2, to destroy mobile Russian air defenses that followed the ground offensive. Russian air defenses pushed forward without clear instructions and, to prevent friendly fire, as most of the air activity was indeed Russian, did not engage air targets, raising some questions about their coordination and IFF protocols. Ukraine benefited from a strong and dominant social media campaign with a strong emphasis on the air war that overwhelmed the traditionally strong presence of Russian troll farms and sympathizers. Likewise, various actors used video game footage to produce fake videos that gained a lot of traction over social media, and then of course there were quickly debunked stories like the ghost of Kyiv that came out of this initial phase as well. In the air, Russia and Ukraine were able to both score some tactical successes. Operationally, in the air war, Russia had early control and initiative, but the ground and air assault attack on the northern axis failed. Though with some losses, the dispersal of Ukraine's ground defenses and survival of its air force puts Ukraine as the strategic victor of this phase. With some overlap with the previous period that we looked at, Phase 2 saw a shift in Russian tactics. Ukrainian defenses began to recover from the earlier confusion and present a greater threat. As Russia continued to enjoy the advantage in the air, the VKS began to support the ground offensive with strike missions. Russian electronic warfare was scaled back where it was interfering with their own operations, but it did remain active. A parallel shift to anti-radiation missiles and helicopters to destroy air defenses occurred. After mounting losses, the VKS shifted away from deep penetration over to standoff cruise missile attacks against fixed targets of military, governmental, cultural, and civilian nature. Throughout the conflict, Russia consistently hits both military and civilian targets with cruise missiles or loitering munitions. By mid-March, a partial shift to night missions occurred with the Sukhoi 34 fleet. This phase also saw heavy bombardments of cities such as Kharkiv and Mariupol, where the limited use of precision-guided ammunition had the predictable results on these population centers. Russian air defenses started to lock down the north and southern air zones for anything except treetop level Ukrainian cap and strike sorties. Going into April, the attack on Kyiv had failed. The VKS started to maneuver away from operations in the north and pivot towards the south, where it had greater operational freedom. During this time, Russia took steady losses to its helicopter fleet, with rotary wing activity steadily decreasing. The number of deep penetrations decreased drastically. Helicopters instead turned to standoff attacks. Ukraine flew a significant number of low-level attack and combat air patrol sorties around Kyiv. The technical mismatch against VKS aviation places them at a disadvantage. Russian fighters achieve radar locks and fire missiles from ranges that Ukrainian pilots cannot counter. This results in Ukrainian losses in their MiG-29 and Sukhoi 27 fighter fleet, as well as the Sukhoi 24 and Sukhoi 25 attack aircraft fleet. Long-range Russian air defenses start to become a more serious threat, and penetrations into Russian-held territory become rare. In parallel, Ukrainian air defenses begin to present a greater threat to Russian aviation. They become the primary tool to secure the airspace. This forces the Russian fleet to lower altitudes, oftentimes around 500 feet, lowering their accuracy and putting them into the danger zone of manpads. Manpads become the main danger to rotary wing and fixed-wing aviation sorties and remain so to this day. The early success of TB2 as a strike platform was a short-lived one. Although RPA strikes inflict losses, it appears that Ukraine withheld much of the footage to release it then later over a longer period of time, given the impression of continuous RPA strikes. This masked the fact that the TB2 fleet had received significant losses and that these were gradually moved to different purposes. At the same time, the use of small UAVs on the tactical level increased. In one incident, it appears that Ukraine was able to strike a Russian oil depot in Belgorod. On a technical and tactical level, the Ukrainian Air Force remained at a disadvantage in the air, given the specs of the VKS. This phase highlights how temporal and area-specific the air war now is, as the sovereign airspace provided more opportunities for Russian aviation than the area around Kyiv. Overall, the Russian air assets adapted more fluidly to the changing circumstances than Russian ground units. The operational tempo was slowing down throughout this phase, with the air war starting to move away from a battle over air superiority to a battle of air denial. With the successful defense of Kyiv, the main axis of attack lay in the east and south. While regular air activity continued, this period is mostly associated with the increasing use of UAVs and loitering munitions. With Russia concentrating on Donbass, it placed a large focus on electronic warfare to disrupt Ukrainian air operations. An emphasis on reintegrating long-range air defense also closed off the area to the Ukrainian Air Force. The use of UAVs and RPAs increased considerably among Russian forces. This was used for both reconnaissance, artillery spotting and intelligence gathering. At the same time, both sides focused on counter-UAV. It is estimated that only a third of UAV missions are successful. Russian fixed-wing aviation focuses on areas that it can access with limited risks. Thus, it engages in heavy bombing of Mariupol during this period, and it flies a considerable number of tactical airstrikes around the front lines. The VKS displays an ability to use small formation in coordinated strikes, incorporating both electronic warfare and close air support. Cruise missile strikes, also by strategic aviation, continue, though the numbers slowly reduce from larger salvos to single strikes. Rotary wing aviation remains active, focusing on standoff strikes. Ukrainian ground-based air defenses have been reorganized and are layering their operational fields in a comprehensive manner to block off the penetration. They were able to intercept more than half of penetrating Russian aircraft and cruise missile strikes. Influx of NATO stocks in terms of air defense ammunition and systems continue. This compensates for the depletion rate of Ukrainian stocks and starts to introduce new systems like Gepard. Figures from Ukraine suggest that UAVs suffer amongst the highest attrition rates, with about 90% destroyed by the summer. Figures for Russia are unknown but likely similar. Use of loitering munitions such as Switchblade commence around May. The importance of UAVs has led to a severe increase in foreign purchases and donations to Ukraine from abroad, as well as the growth of DIY workshops and crowdfunding. In one notable incident, Zaki Air Base in Crimea was hit. Throughout this phase, UAVs and loitering munitions were used en masse to assist both Russian and Ukrainian forces. This is especially so in the Donbass region. While Ukrainian UAV activity received the lion's share of attention, Russia uses them to similar effect. Russian aviation displays tactical innovation in light of a changing environment, but it does have to limit operations to the strategic rear and the front line. Going into the European autumn months, fighting was especially fierce around Kharkiv and Kherson. In the air, new threats emerge, requiring Ukraine to shift their attention. The VKS focuses on denying airspace over Russian-held territory with rotating cap. The technical advantage in radar and missile range give Russian fighters a tactical advantage. Strike missions were consistently flown, with the VKS continuing to operate in smaller strike packages at the front lines. A lack of precision-guided ammunition, the requirements to stay low and fast, and the ongoing threat of Ukrainian air defenses prevent Russia from exploiting its ongoing numerical advantage in the air. The VKS takes trickling combat losses, but significantly, there's also evidence suggesting a number of non-combat losses, indicating potential difficulties with airframe as well as maintenance and aircrew fatigue. On the other hand, Russia locks down large areas with its long-range ground-based air defenses. Russian ground units continue to use UAVs. The most significant shift in Russian attacks came with the Shahed loitering munitions, so-called kamikaze drones. Shaheds began to be used in increasing numbers, sometimes operating in salvos alongside cruise missiles. Next to the bombardment of multiple cities, the electrical infrastructure becomes a major focus. Russia also starts to invest more efforts into equipping its units with UAVs and counter-UAV equipment. For Ukraine's Air Force, this period became an active one with frequent ground strike sorties. It also started to adopt Western weapon systems, famously the AGM-88 HARM missile used against Russian air defenses. Though the difficulties of interfacing the AGM-88 with Ukrainian avionics made this an ad hoc integration, it does provide one example of technical and tactical innovation. Ukrainian air defenses had to adapt to Shahed. While 50% of them were shot down during this time, they caused damage and casualties in Ukrainian cities and the electrical infrastructure. The move of air defenses closer to the cities draws away systems from the front line, with Ukraine suffering a high depletion rate of air defense ammunition. These attacks cause Western aid in air defense systems and ammunition to be a new priority, with systems like IISS SLM and Avenger being sent. Ukrainian units continue to use UAVs, although the focus is always on ISR. Nevertheless, either by dropping some munitions or through the use of first-person view drones, specialized UAVs carrying ammunition have become a constant. If you are interested in this aspect, I would highly suggest my recent conversation with a Ukrainian FPV pilot. While the airspace remains contested and denied to both sides, this phase is a good example of how innovation and shifting threat scenarios require adaptation. The introduction of the Shahed was a cheap but significant shift, forcing Ukraine to adapt to a new threat and use up surface-to-air munitions.
Та підари. Підари, от'єбують з того будинку, де... О, є!
Going into 2023, the fighting in Ukraine across frozen and muddy fields continues unabated, though the air domain has shifted somewhat, with seemingly a reserved use of fixed-wing aviation. This final phase is the hardest to sum up, simply because it is still ongoing and there is a lack of clear data. Fighting continues on the ground, with various cities such as Bakhmut and Volodar being the focus. UAVs continue to be used and systems such as FPV drones are used in increasing numbers. Russia has also reportedly accelerated the use of short-range ballistic missiles, which are harder to counter for Ukraine. And Western-supplied air defense systems are starting to play a more active role, with sources claiming a near 100% interception rate on NASAMS and IRIS-T SLM. On the whole, there seems to be no major shift in the use of fixed-wing and rotary-wing aviation, with these continuing to fly low-level rocket-lobbing strike missions. After a year of fighting, there remains a stalemate in the air. There is, I think, one more important general takeaway from all of this that I think is especially important given sort of the constant stream of daily updates in Ukraine-related videos on YouTube. We have to admit that we know much less about this conflict than we think we do. Many assumptions, even if supported by evidence at the time, have been proven wrong due to the emergence of new data and information. We want to know what is going on, so we start to make inferences in a way that makes sense to us, rather than looking at what the data tells us, including its limitations and contradictions. And in a fast digital media world, where we constantly seek to fill that vacuum of information, incomplete, spurious and misleading conclusions are never far away. This is not surprising, this is how these things work, but it must be recognized, especially as both Ukraine and Russia shape the data pool by choosing when and how to release what type of information. I'm of course very interested to know what you think some of the main takeaways are and what trends you have observed in the air domain and what other nations might want to learn from this. So leave those impressions in the comments below. And that brings us to a close on this video. Big thank you to patrons and channel members as well as Andrew, and as always, have a great day and see you in the sky.